Hello there, little fairytale friends. My name is Fina, and I warmly welcome you to a new StoryPath here on SoundTales. A StoryPath is like a tale with both light and shadow, a story that goes a little deeper, where not everything is kind and not everyone gets a happy ending, but where courage, heart, and love always remain. It's in these stories that we dare to feel a little bit more, for those of you who are brave enough. So, if you're ready, let us step onto our path with Hans Christian Andersen's tale of The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Chapter 1. In the Old Room. Once upon a time, toys were made of tin and paper and dreams. In a small room, in an old house, tucked away on a winding cobblestone lane, stood a large table of dark wood. Near the window, where sunlight fell in crooked stripes, its surface was worn and polished by countless years where hands had rested, written, and forgotten. Along the walls, shelves were packed with books, their spines faded and bindings frayed. Some stood straight, others leaned against each other like tired old friends. By the tall window hung a curtain, thin as spiderweb and faded by the sun. Light filtered through the fabric in pale bands, where dust motes danced like tiny forgotten memories in the air. And if you listened closely, really closely, you could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. A quiet, slow tick-tock. It was a quiet house, a place where time seemed to breathe slowly, and in the center of the great table stood a box. It was made of thick cardboard, wrapped in once glimmering red paper, now frayed at the edges. A thin gilded pattern edged the lid, and when the sunlight touched it just right, it shimmered faintly, like a whisper from another time. When the lid was gently lifted and the folds of paper creaked softly, a faint scent of tin escaped. Cold, metallic, like the memory of something old and forgotten. And inside, they lay, 25 little soldiers, cast from gleaming tin, with helmets shining like silver, red jackets with tiny golden buttons, and rifles resting against their shoulders. They lay close together in their box, as if asleep. But then, sometime during the day, the soft creak of the lid was heard, and a small hand, tiny fingers lifting the soldiers out, one by one. Some were placed along the edge of the table. Others landed on the floor, in the middle of an imaginary battlefield, among bookends, chair legs, and dust bunnies. A few were set in front of the cold fireplace, where ashes from old fires still lay like grey shadows. The soldiers all looked exactly the same. All except one. One soldier had been cast with only a single leg. Perhaps the tin had run out in the mold, or maybe it was meant to be. That soldier was picked up last. The child's fingers lingered a moment longer on his little helmet, as if something about him stood out. Then he was placed down, not among the others, not even on the table. He was set alone on the windowsill, close to the glass, close to the world outside, as if the child without quite knowing why, understood that this soldier needed light and air. And even though he only had one leg, he stood, straight, proud, as steadfast as the others. Yes, and maybe even more so than all of the others, come to think of it. There was something in him, something you couldn't see, but you could feel. A strength, a heart, unmoving and proud and quiet. There he stood, the steadfast tin soldier, tall and unshakable. Not far from the box stood another figure, a paper ballerina. She balanced on one leg, the other lifted in an eternal dance. Her skirt was as thin as frost, white as new-fallen snow, and on her chest she wore a tiny star, sparkling, almost alive. And when she spun slowly in the dim light, the star would catch it, casting glimmering reflections into the shadows. And in that old, silent room, the steadfast tin soldier saw her. He said nothing, of course. He couldn't speak, but in his heart, he knew. He knew that he and the ballerina weren't so different after all. He saw her standing there in perfect balance, and he himself, with also just the one leg, stood just as steady, as if that something connected them, without any words. So there they stood now, silent, together. And outside, the wind moved gently in the trees. Day slid into evening. The shadows in the room grew longer and deeper. The light faded, and the ticking of the clock became clearer. And when the night fell, and the house went quiet, when the people were fast asleep, something began to change. For when the deep stillness of night settled like a blanket over the house, something happened that only ever happens when no one's watching. The toys began to wake. Chapter 2. When the Night Awakens. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Somewhere in the darkest corner of the room, a drum rolled across the floor with a soft and barely audible rumble. Moments later, 2 tiny tin soldiers clumsily climbed up onto the table. Their movements were stiff, as if every joint needed to be awakened. An old toy horse began swaying from side to side, each rock accompanied by a long creaking sound from worn joints and cracked wheels. In the shadows, more figures began to stir. Wooden puppets with faded smiles, pull-along animals creaking over the gaps in the floorboards, tiny music boxes opening their lids of their own accord, letting fractured notes leak into the night, one by one. They danced, they whispered, they played in the dark as if the night belonged to them, and only them. A tiny cart with crooked wheels squeaked past, its echo lingering in the air. A rag doll spun in circles, faster and faster, until she toppled over with a soft thud and a little giggle. A tin frog took a few jerky sideways hops across the floor before it stopped with a clatter. 2 porcelain dolls crouched behind an open book, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. One of the music boxes snapped its lid shut with a sharp clunk, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. The room had awakened. What had just been still and slumbering was now alive. But one figure stood motionless. It was the Steadfast Tin Soldier. His single leg braced firmly against the cold windowsill, his gaze unshaken, still fixed on the ballerina. Around him, the play became more intense. A doll called out cheerfully, "Come dance with us!" A small soldier in a blue jacket gave him a playful nudge, while a rag doll tugged on the edge of his coat, and a little wheeled bear squeaked softly,
"Come on, before he wakes up."
But the tin soldier said nothing. He didn't move. He just stood there, steady as stone. At the far end of the room, in a dusty corner, barely touched by light, stood an old jack-in-the-box, scratched, worn, yet still painted with fading reds, blues, and cracked gold. On its side, a small metal crank began to turn. One by one, the toy's eyes turned in that direction. Voices died out. Movements froze, as if they were all holding their breath. A little doll hid behind the book. The tin frog froze mid-jump. A whisper slipped through the air.
Not him. Not yet.
A rag doll tugged her friend by the sleeve.
Come, hide.
A tiny trumpet dropped and rolled across the floor, disappearing into the shadows. They all knew who lived inside the box, and none of them wanted to get too close. Now the crank spun faster. A drawn-out, screeching sound sliced through the silence as it spun faster and faster. Something inside it was waking up. The toys who had just been playing were now crawling away. They crouched in the corners, their eyes filled with fear. And suddenly, the lid burst open, and a clown's head shot up on a long, winding spring. Red nose, painted cheeks, a stiff, wide grin. A face painted to bring joy, but behind the paint, something cold was hiding. Something that did not want to play. The clown swayed slowly back and forth. His round, glossy eyes locked straight onto the tin soldier. A doll whispered to the soldier,
"Watch out for him."
Another one added,
"Yeah, be careful. He hates when you don't do what he says."
A little teddy bear trembled.
Yeah, don't look at her. No, don't look at her. Look somewhere else so he doesn't get angry."
The clown's voice suddenly sliced through the room.
"You're just standing there? You're just standing there thinking that you're better than the rest of us?"
He rocked closer.
"She is not for you. She is mine."
But the Steadfast Tin Soldier didn't flinch. His gaze remained on the paper ballerina. The clown's eyes narrowed.
"Do you hear me? You will come to regret this."
He slowly backed away into the corner, and with a violent snap, the clown slammed back into the box. Around the room, nervous laughter trickled out, tense, uneasy. A soldier in a blue jacket cautiously backed away from the edge of the table. A music box snapped its lid shut, and still, the tin soldier stood, unyielding, his gaze unwavering, locked on the ballerina and the little star that shimmered on her chest. Chapter 3. The Fall. The night slipped away. Slowly the darkness began to lift. The The sky outside turned pale and grey-blue, a thin veil behind the silhouettes of the 3 branches. Inside the room, most of the toys now lay silent, still, as if nothing had happened. The drum had rolled under a stool, and now rested there, half hidden in the shadows. The rag doll laid curled up in a heap of fabric, with her head tucked into her own arms. The little toy horse stood with his head lowered, its movements frozen by the night's events. But in the far corner, where the dust lay thick, the colorful, scratched music box still stood. Its lid was closed, or almost closed. There was a narrow crack, barely visible, remained open, and inside, hidden in the shadows beneath the heavy lid, the clown crouched. His gaze was still locked on the Steadfast Tin Soldier, his eyes round, cold, unmoving, that same stiff, icy smile, as if he were waiting. And despite the arrival of morning, despite the light now slowly creeping into the room, the clown's rage had not cooled. Quite the contrary. It was as if the room itself could feel it. The air hung heavy, thick, with something that hadn't yet let go. Then, a sound. Footsteps in the house. A door opened somewhere. The window in the room slid open. Not much, just a small gap. Cold morning air slipped in, making the thin curtain sway slightly. Dust particles rose toward the light and glittered for a moment before fading into shadow. And there, on the windowsill, in the grey dawn, he still stood, the Steadfast Tin Soldier, unyielding, upright, unchanged. He stood with his back to the glass, his gaze turned inward, toward her, the ballerina. She was still there, light, small, her little stars shimmering in the morning glow. But then, something happened. Was it the breeze from the window? A faint vibration from footsteps in the house? Something unseen? Perhaps a push? No one saw, no one heard. But slowly, almost unnoticeably, the little tin soldier began to lean backward. At first, just a touch, then a little more. A faint motion, so small it was barely there. But in the room's shadows, behind a half-open jack-in-the-box, 2 cold, watchful eyes gleamed. And then he tipped over. His single leg slipped from the edge of the windowsill, and suddenly he fell. Out through the window. The air was cold. The motion felt strange, both slow and fast at the same time. A feeling of falling, of weight, of leaving something behind. And then he hit the hard cobblestone and lay still, small and alone. The rain had begun to fall, tiny cold droplets landing on his metal body. Puddles formed in the gutter, and the water slowly began to move, dragging him with it. And somewhere nearby, there were voices. Children playing in the rain. Laughter. Splashes. Small hands folded paper boats, placed them carefully in the flowing water, and watched them sail away. One of the boys spotted something in the gutter.
Hey, look! It's a little soldier!
and without hesitation, he bent down and picked him up. Moments later, the tin soldier found himself in a paper boat. The water carried it forward, first slowly, then faster. The current pulled him away from the house, away from the ballerina, and out toward the unknown. Chapter 4: The Darkness Beneath the City. The little paper boat floated on, carried by the rainwater's current, tossed and rocked through the city's old gutters. The water pulled him farther and farther away from the house, away from the table, away from her. Behind him, the voices of the children started to fade, the laughter and shouts and splashing, until everything disappeared, drowned out by the heavy drum of rain against stone and tin. The water rose, overflowed the edges, slipped into cracks, but the steadfast tin soldier stood firm in the middle of the boat, upright, silent, his gaze fixed straight ahead. The current grew stronger. The shadows of the streets closed in around him. The houses loomed above, tall and dark, like guardians of stone. The windows gaped black and empty toward the rain. The water drew the boat beneath the low stone arches, under bridges. The light disappeared. The walls crept closer, and the air grew cold and damp. Narrow channels led the stream deeper beneath the streets. The filth, rotten wood, withered leaves, scraps of paper swirling around the boat caught by the current. The little boat swayed, slowly turned. No sound reached from the world above, only the murmur of water and the breath of darkness. Time seemed to change down there. It was slow and drawn out, as if the tunnels held memories of forgotten things, voices never heard again. And deep within this darkness, something moved. 2 small glimmers. Eyes. They shimmered faintly in the shadows. It was a rat, large and scruffy. It was wet and had coarse fur, long whiskers, and a long naked tail. It crept along the edge of the stone, fast, silent. A scratching sound against moss and wood. It drew closer to the boat, step by step. Its whiskers trembled in the cold air, its eyes locked onto the boat. Then it stopped, lifted its head, and with a sharp, piercing voice that cut through the tunnel, it asked,
"What are you doing here? Did you have permission to be here?"
The words echoed, bounced off the tunnel's cold stone walls, full of suspicion and something more. Hunger. But the paper boat kept gliding. The current was too strong. The steadfast tin soldier stood there, unyielding. He did not respond. The rat crept along for a bit, skulked beside the edge, its eyes still gleaming. But soon it understood that it was pointless. The water carried the soldier deeper into the darkness. The tunnel twisted, opened wider, and time slipped. It could have been minutes or hours. There was no difference anymore. Up ahead, a rumble, dull, growling, a larger body of water. The boat was swept out into a wide, dark canal. Waves rose tall around the tiny paper boat. Cold winds tore at the paper's thin edges. The rain lashed down from a black sky. The boat struggled, rocked, creaked at its seams. The current twisted and pulled. Water slammed hard against its sides. And then, with a rip, the paper tore. The boat capsized. The Steadfast Tin Soldier was now thrown into the black water. Down, deeper, heavier. The water was icy against his tin body. The darkness closed around him, and he sank slowly through the depths. But there, in the black, something moved again. Large, heavy movements through the water. A shadow, bigger than everything around him, and a wide open mouth with gleaming teeth. It was a fish. It swam circles around the tin soldier, drew closer, and with a single long sucking motion, it swallowed him whole. Inside the fish's belly, everything grew still. Everything fell silent. Chapter 5. In the silence of the deep. Time disappeared. Inside the fish's belly, there was no light, no voices, only a damp, cold silence that wrapped around everything. The Steadfast Tin Soldier stood there, as straight as he could, unyielding. How long he had stood there, no one could say. Was it hours? Days? Weeks? There was no time here. No shifting light. No day turning to night, or night turning to day. No echoing footsteps. No voices speaking. Only the fish's slow and heavy movements through the deep. And darkness. The cold crept into him, slowly, as if the chill of the depths seeped into his metal. But he did not waver. His thoughts grew slow, lingering. The memory of the house, of the dark table, of her, the little ballerina, and her shimmering star. Was she still there? In the house? Did she remember him? Or had time erased every trace of him? It was impossible to know. And still, there was nothing else to hold on to but the memory. So he stood there, loneliest of all, in a dark world that never changed. Time stretched out like one long, eternal breath. Sometimes the fish's body felt heavier, sometimes lighter. Perhaps it was swimming. Perhaps it rested on the seabed. Sometimes the water stirred around him. Sometimes everything was still. Slowly, he lost all sense of up or down, near or far. Only one thing remained: to stand, to hold on. Nothing lasts forever, bad or good. But one day, if it even was a day, something new came. A shudder through the fish's body, fast, jerky movements, muscles tightening, contracting. Something had changed outside. He could feel it. The world out there had awakened. He heard muffled sounds, voices, heavy footsteps. A new sight in the water. Sharp. Strange. It was light. A pale, thin sliver filtering in where no light had been before. The fish had been caught. It was being lifted through the dark waters, now carried upward higher, higher. Through narrow alleys. The water vanished. The fish's body twisted, shuddered. Outside, he heard voices. People shouting, laughing, haggling. Baskets creaking, knives glinting. The fish was thrown onto a market stall. A hand weighed it, turned it. A pleased voice.
Yes, this one will do nicely.
And again it was carried. Upstairs, through a house, into a kitchen. It smelled of fish and herbs, of burning wood and old timber. Knives were laid out. Baskets filled with green sprigs lined the counters. Steam rose from boiling pots. And then, a sharp, quick cut. The fish was opened. A stabbing bright light. Among cold membranes and slick organs, something glinted. A tiny soldier. His metal dulled and cold from the pressure of the deep. Hands dug into the fish's belly. Slippery motions, slick innards sliding between fingers. And there, something hard. Cold.
Well, now, would you look at that? It's a little tin soldier.
A little figure, slick with guts and fish blood. Carefully, he was lifted out. The fish's inside dripped onto the counter. Someone wiped him off with a cloth that quickly turned red and slimy. And when they looked closer, they recognized him. The steadfast little tin soldier, with only one leg. They could hardly believe it. The tin soldier that had disappeared from their house was now returned inside a fish. But soon, he stood there again, in the old room, in the old house, where everything had begun. This time, he was placed high up on the mantelpiece just above the fireplace, and across from him, on the table, stood the little paper ballerina. He wasn't sure how it had happened, but he was truly back with her. In the fireplace a small flame flickered. Someone had lit it that morning to ease the chill. The ballerina's star sparkled faintly in the fire's warm glow. Chapter 6. In the Heart of the Fire. Morning continued. Light fell softly through the window, spreading across the old room in pale streaks. And on the mantelpiece stood the steadfast tin soldier. His gaze remained fixed on the ballerina. And she, the little paper ballerina, still stood in her eternal dance. Her delicate skirt caught the morning light, and the star on her chest sparkled faintly in the shadows. For a moment, everything was still, as if time itself was holding its breath. Nothing moved. But in the far corner of the room, the old jack-in-the-box still sat. Its lid was closed, and yet something in the air felt restless. A chill, a pressure, a presence that refused to let go. It lingered in the shadows, in the corners of the room, as if something was waiting. Then, suddenly, sounds from the kitchen. Footsteps across the floor, doors opening and closing, quick movements. Someone entered. A hand reached for the soldier. Maybe to play. Maybe just to put him away. But what happened next? No one knows. A stumbling step. A too quick motion. And somewhere, in that very moment, a faint, almost inaudible click from the old Jack-in-the-Box. Was it real? Or just imagined? No one knows. But the Steadfast Tin Soldier started to fall. Again. This time, straight down into the open hearth of the stove. Flames rose up. Heat rushed up to meet him. But he still stood there, tall, unyielding. The flames licked his metal. The heat intensified. The shiny surface on the tin began to dull, changed color. And in the hot draft from the fire, something fluttered. A sheet of paper. A delicate skirt. It was the little ballerina. Thrown by a gust of wind, or a shift in the room, she was spinning through the air. But somewhere in the room, something stirred. A click. A barely audible breath. The lid of the Jack-in-the-Box now stood ajar, and the clown watched. He saw her skirt lift. He saw her fly. He saw her leave her place on the table and be drawn into a current that may not even have existed. Or did he create it? Did he open the lid at just that moment? Did he want to see what could happen? In his chest, a pang of triumph, a flicker of guilt, a mocking smile frozen on his face, and then gone. For in that same moment, as she landed in the fire, something inside him vanished, something that would never return. She landed there, near the tin soldier, and in the glow of the flames, they now stood together, side by side, for a first and a final dance. The fire roared around them. The heat became unbearable. His hard tin began to soften. Glittering drops began to form. Her soft paper curled and fluttered. The edge of her skirt turned black. And still, the two figures stood, unyielding. Two hearts brought together in a burning embrace, flame after flame, until the fire at last faded. The heat ebbed away. The hearth lay still, grey and cold. And there, in the ashes, remained only a small heart of tin, and next to it, the ballerina's tiny, glittering star. The end. And so ends the tale of the Steadfast Tin Soldier, a story not just of love or loss, but of staying true to who you are, even when everything burns. A story of courage, and of standing tall and calm, even when everything around you begins to change. Because maybe there's something to that old Swedish saying, det är inte hur man har det, det är hur man tar det. I know, I sound like a Muppet, right? If I refine the saying a little bit, It pretty much translates to, it's not what happens to us that matters most, but how we carry it. Perhaps it's not the events of our lives that define us, but the way we choose to decide to meet them and how we move forward with it. And as long as we carry our hearts steady, there will always be something left behind, something that never disappears. The memory of someone who stood firm and calm amidst chaos. Maybe there is something in this story that you'll take with you. A feeling, a picture, or just a new thought about what it means to stand unshaken in a world that keeps shifting. Thank you for walking this story path with me today. Would you like to hear more stories soon? Maybe there's a fairy tale that you love, one that you'd like me to tell next. Please comment your favorite classic stories. I'm listening. And who knows, maybe it's your favorite fairy tale we'll follow next time, right here on SoundTales. Bye-bye!